Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Shamani Tanamane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nivasesha Sanyavadi Prashkati Desatarani. We've heard about the filters that cover consciousness, and that those filters, they determine how we see the world and how we act. And then we took that and reversed it and tried to interpret how we act, or looking at how we act, in the frame of reference of understanding what the person's consciousness is to cause him to act in that way. And then we took that sort of template and placed it over two great personalities, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and our Srila Prabhupada. And hearing Prabhupada's words, his own words, saying that the magic wand that causes one to see and act in such a different way than the rest of the world, to see Krishna everywhere, that magic wand was, or is, love for Krishna, prema bhakti. And that magic wand, I wanted to say that it reconciled the different contradictions that we saw in the nature of Prabhupada, we saw that firsthand, and of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was basically, by nature, a Bhajananandi. Raise your hand if you could tell me what a Bhajananandi is. Yes, Prabhu. That's the other one. But you were close, but just it's the other one. That's Gostianandi. Bhajananandi means he's satisfied just worshipping Krishna on his own and doesn't need to interact with the world. And that was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur by nature. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave him the order, no, you go and glorify Sridhar Mayapur and glorify Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And based on those orders, he became the Bhajananandi, who was completely an introspective person, became the boldest of preachers. He was the most humble, but challenged everyone. And he did it, as Jagattarini Mataji explained, in very difficult circumstances. And while other people, other great spiritualists, were trying to synthesize the British rule, because they were intimidated by that British rule and its excellences and its pomp and majesty. And you saw all those shots of Queen Victoria. I mean, who wouldn't want to fold their hands and their hats would fall off when they saw Queen Victoria? It was either your hat fell off or your head fell off. It was like that. So there was so much synthesis, there was so much education, and the Indologists were explaining how this is just mythology, etc., etc. And there was so many reactions against that, conservative and liberal reactions against that, and there was violence and this and that. And in the midst of all that, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when Prabhupada came to him and said, first, when he was a young boy, practically in his early 20s, he came to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur on Ultadanga Road in Calcutta, when the movement was just beginning, and said, first we have to become independent, and then people will listen to us, India. And he considered himself part of his nature at that time was to be a Gandhian. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur convinced him that Krishna consciousness was so important that it could not wait for anything, even India's independence. And Prabhupada was very, very a powerful personality at that time. Even though he was young, he was so powerful, he said, he's the first person who ever defeated me in argument. And he understood that he was in the presence of his guru. And he said from that moment on, he accepted him in his heart as his spiritual master until the formal initiation didn't take place until later. So we saw the very difficult circumstances that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was empowered to adopt a particular mood and to spread Krishna consciousness. And fighting with the sahajis, with the casteisms, with the this, with the that, with the materialism, with this influence and that influence. And that which was inspiring him was that magic wand, that whatever his consciousness touched, it turned it to Krishna, and seen as everything as Krishna's mercy, as Krishna's energy. And now we're going to look at what our Srila Prabhupada had to face in his early days of preaching. And it's, in my mind, it's one of the most astounding things. When you take Srila Prabhupada, who was born in 1896, a cultured Bengali gentleman, and you place him in, we're going to see a film clip first of the Haight-Ashbury district in 1967. And Prabhupada wasn't in it at this time, but from this you'll get an understanding, a more clear understanding of what he had to deal with. Things that he, being a cultured Indian gentleman, a Bengali gentleman from an aristocratic family, could not even conceive of was existing. And it was probably a lot easier for you to identify what was going on about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur than it would be to identify with what Prabhupada, one person, all alone, penniless practically speaking, had to deal with. Yes, a quick tour. And this is a tour, so you're going to get a tour. Louder, please.
Take a slight sojourn through the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. This is the new avant-garde left bank area of San Francisco, which has evolved and developed over the past number of years. In fact, I would say that the last 18 months has seen a tremendous increase of the so-called hippies who have invaded and lived in this area. This is a protest against the middle and upper class people of San Francisco, in fact, of the area. It is the belief of the people who live within the area that we, the middle class or the upper class, have done a very, very poor job in running our government and our way of life.
For these people, it's something like visiting the zoo.
Maybe if there are two of you together, just one, if I may. The educated.
He's giving them papers that describe the hippie language and what the words mean. Otherwise, they won't be able to understand it. Hippie terms.
shape. Split is a leaf. Stone, high as on LSD. Straight, square, conventional, also the feeling immediately after an arrow is fixed. Teeny bopper is a hippie in early teens. TL is tenderloin. Trip is an LSD experience. Turn on is to commence a far out experience is to turn on with LSD. Weed is marijuana.
And this is the heart of the town. We turn here onto this street, which is 8th Street. This is the heart of the area. I would say this is confined to approximately a 24 block square area. And not all of them are young, as you can see by looking in the corner here on the right. Friends, man, the psychedelic bookshop.
Psychedelic shop.
A little louder, please.
The shrine of the hippie movement. Started just over a year ago, it spreads the gospel of a dreamy new utopia based on brotherhood and love and LSD. Ron Thielen, the owner, says LSD has, in hippie language, turned him on, made him aware of the insanity of modern society. He wants to drop out, get back to the simple tribal life of the American Indian. American Indian beads, brooches, along with Hindu and Buddhist charms, serve as tribal badges for hippies. The world of the hippies certainly seems seductive, full of flowers, colours, music and love. The flower people, the hippies call themselves, as opposed to the plastic generation, or square, or straight society. The products of the richest, most highly mechanized country on earth. They want to forget it all for the brilliant visions of a simpler life, glimpsed under the influence of drugs. Hippies defend LSD by saying it's non-addictive. They claim it causes no bodily harm. The psychiatric wards of San Francisco's General Hospital are getting more and more cases of hippies suffering from bad LSD trips. Dr. Arthur Kafani, director of psychiatric admissions there, emphasized that a bad trip can occur at any time.
What may be beautiful in one moment may, a few seconds thereafter, be rather frightening. We're up to almost to the point of a complete break with reality or psychosis. And this hardly squares with my concept of beauty, or I think anyone else's, to be acutely so frightened that one has lost control of oneself. So there is another side of the coin. I think that people should realize that these drugs are not all a one-way path to, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but it's a rather two-way sword, in that it can produce a very, very disturbing psychological and perhaps even physical reaction, which could lead to permanent damage in the person's behavior or even the person's thinking.
Are there physical dangers, do you think, to these drugs?
I think that prolonged use of LSD or the psychedelic drugs can produce, and does produce, physical changes in the brain, and as such, which may not be reversible, and which certainly are shown by the person's behavior. And I think there's reason to believe that it does cause brain damage over prolonged period of time, prolonged usage. I would think 1 or 2 times, no, but yet prolonged usage does.
A great many of them definitely do feel that these drugs have opened the way to apprehensions of eternal verities, to religious visions and experiences. Sometimes they felt even coming face to face with God.
But isn't there a danger that there are more people who come here for the kicks and not this religious thing?
There is that great danger, and there are definite signs that the number of those who are coming just for the excitement is increasing. Yes, just for kicks. And sometimes, unfortunately, to exploit the situation for their own purposes. Professional rabble-rousers, people trying to foment riots and drug pushers. So.
Do you think there's a danger that as this place becomes more popular and more tourists come in, that this feeling will then be destroyed by commercialism, by all the shops doing good business?
I don't think so, because I think this economy, the system is dying right now. It's in the throes of death. It's not working. That's why all these people are down here. That's why there's so much interest in the Hare-Acharya, because it offers some kind of hope. The it seems to suggest to all the people out there that are confused and hungry for some kind of spiritual meaning in life, that there is hope, and they're down here looking.
But when hundreds of people come in, there's thousands of people come in. How can you give all these people in others, all of them just sensation seekers and people who give the kicks and for any enlightenment, any meaning?
Well, I couldn't say why people are coming here, for every person who's coming here, or that they're not all really after enlightenment. It's quite possible everybody that comes here is after enlightenment. They may be all be pilgrims. They may not manifest their search and articulate it as well as other people might, but that I think is the subconscious motive for coming. No, I think we'll just have a beautiful summer, man. The people playing drums in the park and turn on the city of San Francisco.
Many predict that there'll be no beautiful summer for the hippies of San Francisco, that the dreamy bohemia of Haight-Ashbury will be destroyed like the big generation of the 50s by thrill seekers, tourists, and commercial exploiters. The psychedelic love generation of the 60s may find that it takes more than new words and new drugs to conquer the old order.
That's about the size of it. We've seen the better and the worst of the Haight-Ashbury district, and now back into Golden Gate Park, and our next stop will be the Japanese Tea Garden, the end of the Haight-Ashbury sojourn.
So ends the beginning of our visit to Haight-Ashbury. And the adventure of Prabhupada is going to begin. Could you put on that other one? Now, just a little more background on what the 60s were like, because this is where Prabhupada entered. The early days and before. That's the name of our retreat here. So the backdrop, we gave you a visual view of what it was like to some degree. I did have to cut out a lot of that because some of it wasn't so appropriate to show in this particular situation. But there was a lot of rebellion going on. There was a lot of rebellion. And what was the rebellion against? It was against a few things. There was against the concept that one could become happy just by having a house and a car and a little family and a job, and the people just didn't see that as worthwhile. And also at the same time there was a war going on, the Vietnamese War, and these young people, the men, were being drafted into the army, and they did not want to go at all because it wasn't a war fighting an enemy. It was so far away. And the enemy, the people didn't feel like was an actual enemy at all. So what happened was that it wasn't a war taken against good and evil, but rather the people were always protesting against the government. And I myself even went to a protest march where 100,000 people gathered in New York against the war in Vietnam. 100,000 people. And then the next day, I noticed the war was still going on. It didn't have the slightest bit of effect. So that was the last protest march that I ever went to. And you could see that these people, these young people, they were, say, 20 years old in the 60s. That means that they died probably, most of them died in World War II. So therefore they were thinking all the time, peace, 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 peace. But really they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do to gain peace. So Prabhupada, he acknowledged that this rebellion against middle-class values, there was something good in it. But what the people didn't have was an actual positive alternative. And as that one fellow said, they had a hope, and that's what people did have in those days. They had a hope that there was a different way to approach life, there's a different way to approach reality. But what happened was, unfortunately, for so many people, that they took shelter without a proper positive alternative. They took shelter of, rather than something that was sattvic and goodness, they took shelter of the mode of ignorance. They took shelter of just heavy music that really had no purpose. They took shelter of intoxication. And they took shelter of intimacy with the opposite sex. And this was what life, they thought, was. And rather than elevating them in consciousness, all that dealing with tamagun, the mode of ignorance, it pushed them down in consciousness still further, generally speaking. And Prabhupada himself said that that they were correct. They were correct in their anti-materialism, but they didn't have a proper positive alternative. So into this whole scene of rebellion, Prabhupada, at 70 years old, first time leaving India, he landed in one of the two centers of this rebellion, and one was New York and the other was San Francisco, the Haight-Ashbury. And at that time in the United States, similar to Australia, there was no policy of allowing Indians into the country. So no one had ever met any Indians, practically speaking. I remember in the university there was one Sikh fellow who was a student in the university, and that was the first time I ever saw a pagri. And I thought, that is amazing. How does he do that? But we had never even met an Indian, and practically speaking, I had never met, in growing up, I never met one person who was a vegetarian even. But then again, I never met anyone who was divorced either. So there was something stable there. But Prabhupada entered, and one of the first Indians to have an influence, but India's influence was already on the shores of the United States in New York, because a lot of the young hippies, they had gone to India. A lot of the older ones, the leaders, they had gone to India and seen India with all, in those days, in the 60s, it's very, very different than it was now. Very, very, very different, because it wasn't at all modern. If you had a car, it was only an ambassador, for one thing. And nowadays, you can't even find an ambassador, practically speaking. But it was different in so many ways. But these hippies went there to India, and they associated with sadhus, but not often of the highest quality of sadhus. They were what we would call nowadays, in Vrindavan, they call them Chilam Baba. That basically, anyway, Shanti. And that's what they thought sadhu life was like. And they came back, and if you saw the hippies, that's what they looked like, with the long hair and the same mood and detachment from the world, didn't want to be part of the world, but really taking shelter of intoxication. But yet, there was something sincere in many of them, there was a hope that there was a hope that there was more to life than this, I would say, middle class trying to acquire more and more and simple materialism. There was a hope. So then Srila Prabhupada arrived in New York in 1965, and when he arrived, he said when he got off, he didn't even fly. He went by boat, and we know the story. It's almost like it's so unbelievable, practically speaking. It's almost like a myth. He arrived on the boat. He had 2 heart attacks. Krishna came to him and said, "Don't worry, everything will be all right. I will take care of you." He said when he got off the boat, the Jaladuta, he did not know whether to turn left. He did not know whether to turn right. Practically speaking, he had no money. He didn't know one person. And there he was. And look what he was up against. He didn't know about the hippies at that time. He even brought with him, the things that he brought with him, if you think about what they were, he brought his books. He didn't feel that it was proper to come without the Bhagavatams, because this was his strength. And he brought an umbrella and some flat rice, because he didn't know if there would be any vegetarian food available. And no money, and he got off the boat, and he was entered in the United States. He went to Butler, Pennsylvania, then he came to New York, and practically this cultured gentleman was living homelessly. He did not know anyone. He did not know where. He didn't have any place to live. And one time he was living with a Dr. Misra, and who was an impersonalist. And Dr. Misra, they were kind. He was kind to him, but he wouldn't let Prabhupada speak, because Prabhupada would immediately start criticizing everything that Dr. Misra said. And he was teaching yoga and everything like that. And also it came out later that he was acting somewhat inappropriately in other ways. But he wouldn't let Prabhupada speak. And when he was ill, Prabhupada would cook for him when Dr. Misra became ill. And he said that Prabhupada saved his life with his devotion-filled cooking. But there he was. Then he moved in. Someone offered him a flat somewhere on the Bowery. And if you've ever been to New York, you've probably never been to the Bowery, because it's the place where all the how do you say it in Australian again? No, but you don't say it in Australian in that way. That's the American way. The Darrows, yes, the Darrows. The Darrows live, and Prabhupada had a flat there, sharing with someone who was crazy. A young man who, by taking drugs, had gone crazy. He was holding classes there, but then this young man, in his insanity, had attacked him with a knife. And Prabhupada actually said, there was one time he was walking with his disciples in 1974 or so, at Victoria Memorial in what city? Does anyone know where that Victoria Memorial is? In Calcutta, yes. It's a huge structure. I actually went there on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada once in 74. But he said that when it was being built, there was scaffolding made of bamboo going to the top, of course. And when he was young, he said, he climbed it to the very top. So one of his disciples said, "Prabhupada, you must have been so brave to do that." And Prabhupada replied, "I still am brave. Because otherwise how could I have come to your country alone at 70 years old? 70 years old. And the whole history of the Hare Krishna movement took place after Prabhupada was 70 years old. It's quite inconceivable until you become, especially when you become around 70 years old, having to deal with all that. It's inconceivable, practically speaking. So what is the lens that we can view what was the engine motivating him and pushing him in this way? And that we spoke about earlier. It was love for Krishna, prema bhakti. So then Prabhupada one morning came to not Robert Grant, but Mukunda Maharaj's, Michael Grant. And with another person that he had met, and Prabhupada had stayed in this other person's house, Robert Jurgens or something like that, and there was meat in the refrigerator and everything, and Prabhupada he didn't have any place to stay. So they went to Michael Grant, and you have to help him, you have to help him. You have to help him. So very quickly, by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, they found Michael Grant, Mukunda, found 26 2nd Avenue. And then Prabhupada, which was in the heart, what was called the East Village, which was the equivalent of the Haight-Ashbury at that time. So Prabhupada was there, and no one, practically, a lone Indian man with no support, elderly, wearing dhoti, kurta, beads, no one took him seriously, practically speaking, with veneration. Right now, if Prabhupada walked in, we would all bow down, we'd start kirtan, we'd want to hear from him. But no one took him seriously. But gradually, these young seekers, crazy and intoxicated and addicted to so many things as they were, of anyone in the whole world, in India, no one took him seriously, practically speaking. But these people took him seriously. And this was before he was Prabhupada. First, he was known as the Swami. And even I heard about the Swami years before I met Prabhupada when I was in New York. I heard about the Swami. And it was known at that time that the Swami became ill. So when you'd meet someone from New York, you'd say, "How is the Swami?" But at this time, Prabhupada, at 70 years old, had started giving classes, and gradually people started attending. And Prabhupada was so, how to say it? Well, there I said it. He was so charming. Later on, we could understand what the cause of his charmingness was. But it really appeared, the way he dressed, the way he acted, and the way the way he didn't interact with the material element of the world. He was interacting with Krishna, but we didn't know that at that time. So as clearly as it became obvious later. But it came out in an incredibly charming nature. And he charmed these people who, even though they had hope, they were very, very cynical about everything and everyone. But Prabhupada completely charmed them with his personal sweetness, with his Krishna consciousness, with his prasadam, and the way he interacted. And he charmed them with the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And he didn't just talk sweetly to them. They were radical. You know what radical means? The same word comes from the word root. The word radish, muli. Same. Root. It's a root. So radical means want to change everything at the root. So Prabhupada was even more radical than them, because the root of material existence was, as Jagattarini said earlier, this concept of me as the center, me as the enjoyer. I actually, as a young devotee, I went to the Woodstock Festival in 1969, I think it was, and they were playing that kind of rock and roll music, and the people was singing. The song was, "You are moving the sun, you are moving the moon," and they were all dancing to this, completely intoxicated. And we were the next to go on stage after that, trying to tell them to chant Hare Krishna. After these people, their mood is, you're moving the sun and moving the moon and everything. In other words, you are God. So this is what Prabhupada walked into. And he completely charmed everyone. Now, and he never compromised what the philosophy was and what the essential practices of Krishna consciousness was. Now, next film clip. This is one of the early ones made of Prabhupada's, probably made in 1966, 1967. This was what it was like at 26 2nd Avenue. This is the temple room. Evening kirtan. Tambura, didn't know how to play. Harmonium, no one knew how to play the keys even, just droning it. But the kirtans had captivated everyone because they were transcendental. Gargamuni, this is who Prabhupada started the Hare Krishna movement with.
I was wandering in the street and some of the boys saw me and gradually they came to me. And actually I did not try anything for developing this institution. The boys did it.
He would cook and feed them.
They are not fools. Mr. Howard is MA. He was BA. And he is doctor of PhD, so they are all educated. So they are not fools that they are taking this blind, you know. Most of my students, they were under the spell of this heresy, but they are given up everything. They're simply living on this chapati and some fruits and that's all. They don't want,
Kirtanananda.
They don't want wine, they don't want cigarettes, they don't want tea, coffee, nothing. And they're chanting Hare Krishna, they're following my instructions. So I'm getting good home.
Meal is composed of rice, and this is the soup which we call dal, and a combination of vegetables, and the chapati, which is made out of whole wheat. You see, it's all vegetable and grain. Sometimes some fruit, there's fruit in the dal. No meat, no animal product, just egg. This is because in the Gita, Krishna has told us what he wants us to eat, namely fresh fruits and grains, not animal products. And so we have a very delicious meal here. It's very cheap. It goes a long way. It's quite easy to prepare. And we have a lot of fun.
And we have a lot of fun. So, I wanted to give some examples of Prabhupada's dealings that I know of, how he charmed people, and it wasn't easy too. So sometimes people who in the class, he would sit there there was no actual Vyasa-san, but there was a little bit of a platform, and he would sit. And so people would challenge him. They were all intoxicated type of people. Everyone, as Prabhupada said, they all had taken LSD and things like that. So someone said, to Prabhupada, in a room full of people, do you say your people shouldn't take LSD because it's not good for them? And Prabhupada said, yes. So then the man said, well, how do you know it's not good for spiritual life? You've never taken it. He thought he had caught Prabhupada, but you couldn't catch Prabhupada. His consciousness was not at all foggy. It was completely clear. So he said, I did not take it, but all of my students have taken it. And then he asked one of them, who was Howard, who was the MA, to stand up and explain. So he did the preaching, and he said, it's not required. And then he explained, because in this you may come up, but you come down after some time. But with chanting Hare Krishna, you never have to come down. There's never any bad experience of the intoxication wearing off. So this was the frame of reference that he had to preach in. Then someone asked him, what is it like in Goloka Vrindavan? I've mentioned to this in class many times before. Now, how are you going to, he's mentioned Goloka Vrindavan, but how are you going to explain to them that there's Krishna, there's cows, Krishna's playing his flute, and there's cowherd boys and gopis and Mother Yashoda and Govardhan Hill and the Jamuna River? How would they conceive of anything like that on the spiritual level? So what is it like in Goloka Vrindavan? And Prabhupada replied, you won't be bothered by the draft board. Which means because everyone was going, I actually heard this one, because they were being drafted into the army, and you won't have that there. And someone asked him, how does chanting Hare Krishna compare to LSD? And Prabhupada said, it is like an ocean of LSD. He just went to the level, because you have to. A teacher explains the unknown through the known. So what could he say? Here's another example, that Hayagriva, Mukunda, and other devotee Haridas, they were clever, they were musicians, they were writers. So they heard from Prabhupada. This is from Hayagriva's book, The Hare Krishna Explosion. They heard from Prabhupada that there was one person named Narada Muni who could travel in outer space, and he just chanted Hare Krishna, and he never stayed in any place more than 3 days. So they heard that from Prabhupada. So they wrote a song about it. And they made that song into a record about Narada Muni. And I used to have that record. And I even Googled it, and Google couldn't find it. So it's really gone. But this was the song. Narada Muni, eternal spaceman, he can travel further than spaceships can. Spreading sounds of love and joy vibrations to all the cosmic incarnations. Singing with bliss upon his veena, the whole cosmos is his arena. He sang Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So then they sang Hare Krishna on there. And then it continues. It's not over yet. Do you know who is the first eternal spaceman of the universe? Dun, 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 bam, 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 singing this. The first to send his wild vibrations to all the cosmic superstations. For the song he always shouts sends the planets flipping out. He sings to Virgo and Pleiades, the nearest far star, for he can travel where he pleases. But I'll tell you, and this was the part that's repeated again and again as the refrain, but I'll tell you, before you think I'm loony, that I'm talking about Narada Muni. And then it would go into eternal spaceman. He can travel further than spaceships can. I'll tell you before you think I'm loony that I'm talking about Narada Muni, eternal spaceman. But that's not the best part. Prabhupada heard this song. He said, "You must write more such songs." Songs praising the Acharyas, great saintly persons. The bhakta in love with God wants to sing to him and his representatives. And Hare Krishna of all songs is the best. It is the call of a child for his father, a call of pure love. Oh, there are many songs in the Vaishnava tradition, songs of Bhaktivedanta Thakur, songs of Mirabai. So how he was such a teacher. He was encouraging. And one last example of how Prabhupada encouraged them, this one is in San Francisco, that on Tuesday evenings, with the hippies that would come, they went to the beach and they held kirtans just as the time when the sun was setting. And the kirtans were in the presence of the Pacific Ocean. And Prabhupada was there. Sitting on the sand, we watched the tide roll in or chant and wait for the sun to dip below the horizon. This is also from the Hare Krishna explosion. So Prabhupada asked them, he says, why is the Pacific in Latin means calm, peaceful. He says, why is it calm? Because it is big and great. When something is so great, it will naturally be calm and has nothing to fear. And that's when one was in the presence of Prabhupada, he carried, it was like this bubble of Krishna consciousness, of peacefulness, of depth and sweetness. So then Haridas builds a fire beside the sand dunes, and we dance and chant around it. Swamiji, they called him Swamiji. First he was Swami, then he became the Swamiji, and then he became in 1968 Prabhupada. So even when I started chanting, he was the Swami and Swamiji. So he was wearing an old overcoat and a scarf around his head, and he was clapping his hands and chanting with all the devotees, and he was chanting Govinda Jai Jai, Gopala Jai Jai, Radharamana Hari Govinda. So they were all the devotees, they were holding hands and circling around the fire. And they were playing cymbals and tambourines, and Hayagriva was playing a trumpet. But of course he didn't know how to play a trumpet, but he was making the sounds. And Swamiji was also dancing, raising his arms in the air, sometimes clapping. As the stars begin to shine bright over the Pacific, and the foam and waves recede in the dark, we sing Narada Muni. This is Prabhupada with them. He wasn't the Founder-Acharya of ISKCON at that time, that great personality sitting on the Vyasasan. He was more like the village guru, that everyone had a relationship with him. So after chanting, we took potatoes and smeared them with melted butter, and we took apples and put raisins and sugar in them, and we put them in the fire, and then we all ate them. As the stars shine brightly and waves crash in the dark, we gather about the fire for warmth and one last Hare Krishna chant. After this, we bow down in the sand, and Swamiji says, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the Pacific Ocean. And we all laugh. And Swamiji laughed the loudest. He was so alive. And he was so alive and reciprocating with what actually was going on. He knew what he wanted, but he was so practical and so sweet that he knew what he had to do to get there. Now, Yeah, 3 of the challenges faced by Prabhupada. Because remember, these people, they wanted freedom. That was another big call. Just freedom, freedom, freedom. And after one of the first kirtans, people would come back to the temple in Tompkins Square Park, and they'd say, Prabhupada said, you can't have freedom in this world. It was exactly the opposite of what people wanted to hear. And if you are free, raise your hand. So some young girl raised her hand. And the Prabhupada said, stand up. Are you free to stop getting old? Sit down. But this was the mood, freedom. Are you free to stop from getting old and dying? So these people were revolutionaries, and the last thing they wanted to join was like an institution of some sort, practically speaking. And they were just frustrated with materialism. So this was one of his first challenges, how to get them to commit themselves to that positive spiritual alternative. It's one thing to be seeking, to be looking for truth, but then when you find it, then the real question comes, am I more attached to seeking it? Or am I going to commit myself when I find a path that I consider valid and true and workable? So how is Prabhupada going to get them to commit himself? The second, to commit themselves, again, commitment is very, very difficult to extract out of anyone when they have a whole different plan in their mind. And who doesn't have a whole different plan in their mind? And these people really had it. Remember how anarchistic they were. You know what anarchistic means? I don't know government, we just should be free to do whatever we want. And actually, when you're free to do whatever you want, then what people usually want entraps them more and more in ignorance, which means they lose their freedom. So, to commit themselves to spiritual practices and a truly spiritual lifestyle, a second more difficult and deeper commitment. To not only join, so to speak, to commit themselves to practices. And then to educate them and have them understand what the philosophy of Krishna consciousness actually was. And in this regard, I have now this was in the very early days, the level of philosophy that people at this time were capable of, had picked up.
There's no real task. We're here to learn. That's what we're doing. And we also, we have jobs to perform to keep the organization running, to keep the word of Krishna being spread. Well, we recently purchased a couple of mimeograph machines. That's helping our printing.
That's the humble beginning of the press.
By constantly being active.
Do you work?
He was rancher later.
Is this kind of like but you meet there every day?
Well, I'm devoting all my time here, so I work here all day. Money has to come in also. Some of us work regular jobs and throw most of our money here, if not all.
Do you feel any different from work?
I feel very good. And closer to God.
What introduced you to this?
A friend of mine told me about Love Celebration at Tompkins Square Park, which was last Thursday, or Thursday before last. And I knew I had been seeking a guru for a while. So Krishna sent me there, and I was there. And after meeting some of the initiates, I knew that the Swami really had to be into something. So I came the very next morning, and I've been here since then.
I came here in America in September 1965. my mission is to preach the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This transcendental vibration will cleanse the dirty things of the mind. It doesn't matter what he is. This transcendental vibration is equally appealing to everyone without any question of language, nationality, creed or caste, because it is coming forth from the depth of the soul. This simple vibration can deliver the people of this age to salvation. Human life is meant for getting out of the threefold miseries of this material existence and forgetting their life's aim. They have become too much materialistic, and the result is that actually they haven't got that peace and of mind or peace of the world which they are entering. And if they take to these chanting, transcendental vibration, their mind, the darkness of the mind will be clear, and they can clearly see their actual identity as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and Krishna, and doctrining their activities in that relationship, everything will be sublime.
I think how we're different from drug people also is to realize that God is here and in my heart and all over all the time, but we're realizing this consciously. To know these things consciously, not just to accept it once and then enjoy. To know this moment to moment.
Well, I've only tried marijuana, but I've never taken anything else. Like I said, I was fortunate enough to have my self-realizations and other changes without drugs.
Perhaps Leering and some of the drug followers, they are functioning high on the low level, and we are functioning high, and we are functioning low on the level of God.
But we must consider ourselves as the gopis. We love Krishna that much more, that we devote our whole lives to Krishna, and we must consider ourselves as females, you see.
But be careful. It takes many lifetimes of perfection to get to be a gopi. One has to be supremely developed, perfect in perfection to be qualified as a gopi. This is the ultimate.
But the reason that one of the people mentioned before, being feminine, is that when the masculine love and the feminine are love, and you are feminine so that you can be loved by Krishna.
Well, does this have anything to do with being celibate, or this has to do with that the supreme being, of course, is male because he is Purusha, as they say in Sanskrit. That is, he is the origin, he is the creator. He is the seed. He plants the seed in the material universe, of which we are the result. Therefore, we are the feminine.
This is not
whole material creation. He is the Supreme Father. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I may be, I may not be. This has nothing to do with it.
I just came in and I was tired. They said, if you're tired, go to sleep and lay down here.
Is this the first day? And this is your first chanting session?
Yeah, this is the first time I've been into it at all.
I came about the 1st of August. Ray was here a little earlier, I believe.
I came around here before.
And then others, of course, have come within the last week.
Right.
But one thing which usually happens, those who come like this, they come and they just never go. Why don't you come and say? Because the Swami has something which you were looking for.
The first thing they did for us was give us our method of chanting, which is so powerful that it would work for anyone. In other words, you don't need to be one person in a million who can really be successful in meditation yoga, where you have to spend years at that discipline without getting any place and then finally achieve it. Our method is so powerful that it will work for anyone in 2 days. Should I bow down when I don't feel anything? Should I say these words when I don't feel anything? He says yes, because this is a training. You see, you want to train yourself. And this is the most important. And then you'll gradually just fall right into it if you work hard at it. You must practice. And this is the main thing. And then you'll become entrapped in it.
So how about now? Do you feel silly?
Oh, excuse me?
Do you feel uncomfortable now?
Oh no, I see all this practicing and work was, it just had to be done in order to where I am now. Anyone who chants Hare Krishna, have you got the whole chant? Well, you have to concentrate on the words, you have to be sincere with the words. You have to surrender yourself to these words. And through this takes practice. It's not done in one session. This takes time. It took me maybe 4 sessions before I began to even chant. You see?
What happens when you do chant?
Well, it's hard to explain. I guess each person has a different reaction, but you just seem to open up. It seems as something flies out of you. It's like a door opens. It slowly opens. So finally it's open, and then you walk into the unknown. The unknown is beautiful.
It was some people, the devotees, talk about how wonderful the early days were, but the reality was that Prabhupada was the only adult in the movement at that time. But Prabhupada's presence did make it exceptional. Now, a fourth challenge. We're back to challenges. A fourth challenge was to get these young Westerners to commit themselves to spreading Krishna consciousness and the preaching movement. So put on the next, and this was the level. This was the Sankirtan movement, the Harinam Sankirtan movement, 1966 perhaps. Yep.
And now we're going to go uptown to St. Mark's Place to do our kirtan and spread joy and peace to the people of New York. We invite all our friends to join us. Hare Krishna.
Brahmananda Prabhu. Okay. Now go back to that was the four challenges that we picked out. Then some of Prabhupada's secrets of success. Now I'm going to go quickly through these because we're already moving late. He was fully focused. He didn't have a second thing going on in his life. It was only one thing, preaching and Krishna consciousness. He had so much a mood of selfless service and dedication to his guru. He really practiced what he preached. And the cause of success was so much his personal association. Because when one entered his personal association, what he had in his heart naturally reflected into your heart. And you wanted that. You wanted to have that thing that he had. And we didn't know at that time really that thing that he had was love for Krishna. Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, he was carrying that sweetness. And by his association, faith and went into the hearts of those who he associated with. He was like a teacher, he was like a father, and he was like a grandfather all at the same time. And he had full faith in the power of the holy names, full faith in the power of the Bhagavatam, full faith in the power of association of devotees, and of course, as we know, he had full faith in prasadam. And this was before there were any deities, even. But there he was. And people didn't know, as you may have gathered, didn't know very much about Krishna consciousness, but they knew him. And he caused their devotion, their dedication. Now, I'll move ahead quickly to the next one, is Prabhupada in San Francisco. Prabhupada went to San Francisco in 1967, and the scene in San Francisco was even wilder than New York. But as you saw at the end of that little video on Haight-Ashbury, where all the people dancing to all the music, well, Prabhupada went to the parks, Golden Gate Park, and he held kirtan there. And the people who were dancing to the rock and roll music and the heavy metal music and the heavy guitars and everything, then started dancing and chanting to the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And Prabhupada was, well, this one, yeah, go ahead. Okay, just start it. But it was wild. The same mood, but Hare Krishna put in the middle of it. And Prabhupada, this was a Prabhupada at 70 some odd years old, dancing, chanting, playing the mridanga. He looked so pleased with everyone. And it became the anthem in New York and in San Francisco. All the hippies would walk around singing Hare Krishna. It was like the anthem of the hippies. And Prabhupada, although there, was not actually there. But yet he was fully there. There's Hayagriva playing the trumpet. And Mukunda Maharaj playing the timpani drum. And Prabhupada is there in the middle of it all. Shyamasundar, Nandarani before that, Yamuna. when Prabhupada was in New York and was having kirtan, they were on the grass, and with all the devotees, a few devotees and people having kirtan. And then a policeman came over and pointed to the sign, "Keep off the grass." And Prabhupada just looked at him, stood up, and sat down on the sidewalk. You just couldn't. But just, so from now on, no one's allowed to complain that their service is too difficult. Because look what Prabhupada had to do, of course. He was really, I remember the first time I saw the video of him in San Francisco with that kirtan, it was like he was vibrating at a different level. You know, and he wasn't there, although he always was completely there, but his consciousness, his heart was fully absorbed in love for Krishna and Vrindavan. That's the only way to understand it. He was a transcendental person. Now, there's a particular point that I have to get to to end, and because both Jagattarini and myself, this was just introducing these great personalities in the place where they actually were preaching, but how they preached is the subject of the next classes, both for how they spoke. Now, just a few things on how tolerant Prabhupada had to be. He was unlimitedly tolerant. You'd have to be completely tolerant to deal with all this, because there was one thing that they were all doing that he wanted them to do. That was chanting Hare Krishna. But there were 10,000 things that he didn't want them to do, and he saw that one thing, and that pleased him. But how tolerant he had to be. How tolerant he had to be. Some examples. That Allen Ginsberg, the poet, who was very famous, and he was in San Francisco, he had told all the hippies that when you stay up all night taking drugs, the next morning you should come to the temple. So they would appear at the temple. Sometimes they would be crazy, and Allen Ginsberg would sometimes come, and there would be 40 people chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra early in the morning. And sometimes people would come in crazy and screaming. And the devotees would have to take them in, be nice to them. And then later on they would bring them up to see Prabhupada, because no one understood they had to protect Prabhupada. There was one person who had been to Vietnam fighting in the war, and he went crazy. So in the tent in Vietnam, he was visited by Martians. And then he met some devotee in the street who told him Prabhupada wrote a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets, and in fact there were Martians. So he wanted to see Prabhupada immediately. So he went to see Prabhupada and said, "Yes, there are Martians." And the dirtiest and the craziest, Prabhupada would tolerate everything. And he would sit on the Vyasasana and people would challenge him, because because there was a whole philosophy of I am God, I am God. They would challenge him. We are all God, we are all God. And they would argue with him. Some of them would prepare arguments. And sometimes people would stand up in the middle of his talk and say, "What are you going to do for the world? What are you going to do for the world?" And there was one time Prabhupada said, "You are also in this world. You should chant and be happy." And then he would argue and argue. And one of the devotees, it describes how one devotee said, "Why don't you just do what he says? You'll like it." And then there was another time where Prabhupada was sitting like on the dais over here. Someone just stood up and said, "I want to speak now. I want to speak. I have something I have to say." They're intoxicated. And there's this cultured Bengali gentleman, and he's untouched, unmoved by all this. And he sits there. And and he tries to interrupt me. He said, later you can speak. And then it describes how the Prabhupada at the end, what he would do, and I experienced this, they would give him an apple at the end. And he would cut the apple into pieces, and then you'd come up and you'd take a piece of the apple. And while that crazy person who was demanding to speak was sitting next to me, cut up the apple, and then he put out the plate that had the apple and the knife right in front of him. And everyone's watched Prabhupada because they knew he was very masterful at dealing with every circumstance. And he put out his hand and took the apple. And everyone went, ah. And what he would do also, because when you're dealing with crazy questioners, if you don't treat the questioner nicely, regardless of how it is, the audience becomes on the side of the other people, become on the side of that person if they don't think you treated them nicely. So Prabhupada was very, very expert. He would let them talk sometimes, so it was clear that they were just talking nonsense. Then he'd say, sit down. Or he'd say, start kirtan. And then everyone was so relieved. People would come to his room one time at least. One girl came to his room banging on his door in the middle of the night, making crazy sounds. And then when Prabhupada, Mukunda was living nearby, so he went down the hall and knocked on Mukunda's, and then the door closed and he was locked out. 1 o'clock at night, he was up translating at that time. So what Prabhupada had to go through to put us in the position that we're in now, where we have the opportunity to chant Hare Krishna. But then, after all this, and now we're getting near the end of where I would like to leave the class, Prabhupada became ill. He left San Francisco, went to New York, and actually had a heart attack where he was, one time he was lying in the bed in the hospital, and he suddenly sat up in the bed and said, Hare Krishna. And they asked the devotees surrounding him, asked him, why did you do that? He said, I thought I was going to die. So it was that close. And then he went back to India. And then this was in the middle of 1967. Look how he was serving like that. He was giving everything. And then 1968, after just 6 months or so in India, he came back to Los Angeles. Then he went to San Francisco. And when he went to San Francisco again, there was a temple, and there was only one devotee who was working, named Jayananda Prabhu. And he had a job as a taxi cab driver. And he was supporting the temple, but it was turning out to be not enough money. So he told all the brahmacharis to get jobs. But Tamal Krishna Maharaj explained that after working a full week, he was making $50 a week after taxes. And Vishnujan Prabhu, didn't want to have a job, so he was making flutes. And he was maybe that girl with the flute that we saw. Vishnujan was wandering up and down the streets. He was that kind of a person, chanting Hare Krishna and selling flutes. And if someone didn't have any money, give them away. So then they weren't making enough money. There were several brahmacharis all trying to make money to support the temple. And Prabhupada said, instead of doing that, why don't you go out and just chant Hare Krishna? And that was the first regular Sankirtan party. Nowadays you wouldn't call it a Sankirtan party, you'd call it a Harinam party. But in those days, a Sankirtan party meant chanting Hare Krishna. So it was the first Sankirtan party. They went out, and then Prabhupada left San Francisco. And they went out, and the first time practically in public, and now it's different. But in those days, you were really looked at as very, very strange if you did something like that. And in any case, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was put in charge of the Sankirtan party. And then when Prabhupada came back 6 months later, he was extremely organized person, and he knew how to manage people under him like that. So they were all dressed immaculately. He would check them before they went out every day, and every day they would go out and they would distribute magazines, and they had on poles pictures of Prabhupada, of Lord Chaitanya, of Gopal Krishna, and they would go out and chant Hare Krishna, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj explains that it was all done very, very well, and their singing was better, and their dancing was better. Then when Prabhupada came back to San Francisco, after going to Montreal and the East Coast, then they went in front of Prabhupada's door when he was going to class, and they were chanting. There were 8 of them at that time. And Prabhupada came out, and he was so happy. They all had matching turtleneck shirts on and nice dhotis and everything. And then Prabhupada was very happy. And then when he got in the car and went to the temple to give class, they ran there before him. They were waiting for him when he got there, and he was even more pleased. And Prabhupada then said, "Wherever I go, you should come with me and chant." So then Prabhupada went to Seattle, Washington, which is north in the United States, and the Sankirtan party went with him. And then later on, Prabhupada went to Los Angeles again, and the Sankirtan party was there. He asked them to be there. And that's going to be the subject of the second class. When I first heard these classes that he gave, or more than the classes, the questions and answers, everything was very, very... Prabhupada was Prabhupada by then, but he wasn't yet the Founder-Acharya of ISKCON, that unapproachable person. Everyone was very relaxed with him. So the kind of questions that the devotees asked, and the way he answered those questions, was very intimate and very, very sweet. And that's what we're going to present in my part of the next session, how Prabhupada dealt with the devotees, and again an expression of his heart. And with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, expressed in a different way, in a different culture, at a different time, to a different group of people, another expression of the heart. Okay. Since I'm already so much over time, I'm still going to go a little further over time. 6 minutes, though, I think it is. The last kirtan. And this one we sing along with. This is Tompkins Square Park, number 6. Yes. Everyone. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Okay, go take prasadam, and we'll see you at 4 o'clock. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki jai.